That's the news for now. Back to the tally room with Kerry O'Brien.
Welcome back to the tally room here in Canberra, where the count of 14 million votes has already begun. This is a night that could produce any one of 4 different results. A nail-biting win for Labor, an equally slender win for the Coalition, or a hung parliament with minority government formed by either of the 2 major parties, with 1 or more of the 3 independents and possibly 1 new member of the Greens in the House of Representatives. There may even be a 4th independent, who knows? With me, 2 of the sharpest numbers men in Australian politics, Foreign Minister Stephen Smith and former Liberal Senate leader Nick Minchin, who's travelled with Tony Abbott throughout this campaign. Now, the way these seats are going to fall, obviously we're going to be looking primarily at Queensland and New South Wales. But if Labor loses a lot of seats, it really could come down to a couple of seats in Victoria, 1 or 2 in South Australia, even 1 or 2 in Western Australia, even, dare I say, at the seat of Solomon in the Territory, because everybody seems to be assuming that no seats are going to change hands in Tasmania.
Well, in general terms, that's right. We will have a swing against us in Queensland, a swing against us in New South Wales. The question will be the extent to which we can stem the flow and minimise the losses. What would be of really invaluable assistance to us would be if we could pick up a seat in Victoria, McEwen, Latrobe, Dunkley, a roughie, or a seat in South Australia, and Boothby may be a roughie prospect for us there. If we do that, we win 1 from the Coalition. It's an extra 2 that they have to win to get into government. So, and we know there are
But equally you could lose Corangamite in Victoria.
I think we'll hang on to Corangamite. I think the published polls do show we're doing well in Victoria and South Australia and doing it tough in New South Wales and Queensland. I think one of the reasons for that is that we might be seeing a bit of a change here in Australian politics. Historically, the public have made a clear distinction between federal elections and state elections. And so, for example, Bob Carr doing very well in New South Wales at the same time as John Howard did very well. There's no doubt that we are suffering from brand Labor in Queensland and New South Wales as a result of long-standing, long-term governments there. But to win a seat in Victoria, to win a seat in South Australia, and maybe to hang on to Hasluck and Swan in the West would be a substantial contribution to hanging on. But there will be swings against us, and the risk is that whilst we might overall get 50% of the 2-party preferred vote, we lose it on the ground in Queensland and New South Wales.
Now, Nick mentioned you concentrated with Tony Abbott very heavily in New South Wales and Queensland. Did you see clear evidence that the damage to the New South Wales brand was bleeding across to federal Labor?
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating about this election in particular are this demonstration of these regional variations in Australia, and I think this is going to be an increasing phenomenon where you get states going in different directions. And I must say what most struck me in the campaign was the anti-Labor mood in Western Sydney, which obviously is heavily influenced by state politics, and indeed the swing to the Liberal Party in the Penrith by-election of 25% is the reason I think Kevin Rudd bit the dust. That happened 3 days after that by-election. And what was also very interesting was the incredibly adverse reaction to the Labor promise on this Parramatta-Epping railway. You'd think promising $2.5 billion for a railway would be a hallelujah moment. Instead, it just completely backfired on Labor, which shows you the antipathy to Labor and all the broken promises.
Do you think it will turn out that has actually hurt Maxine McEwen-Bennelong?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think Bennelong is one of the seats to watch tonight, and I predict that we will take that seat back, and I think it has hurt Labor.
Yeah. Now, Anthony Green, have we got any figures yet, anything to talk about?
Just broad figures. Swing, these are all 0.1% counted in New South Wales, a 4% swing against Labor. Queensland, 0.1% counted, just under 8% swing. And in Victoria, the latest figure is 4% swing against Labor. Now, these are very early figures. But for a while, we won't get anything sensible in individual seats. We'll be getting these sorts of figures. I must say, you tend to get country seats first, so there's nothing meaningful in those figures. No swing at all in Tasmania going on. That's the most advanced count at this stage.
Now, one of the differences with this campaign to any election going all the way back to 1987 is that we get the whole of the East Coast in one hit. There is no daylight saving differential anywhere on the East Coast. So When the numbers do start flowing, they could come through quite quickly.
In the next 15 minutes, we'll be getting meaningful figures.
Okay. The disenchantment of many Labor voters, particularly over climate change, has been manna from heaven for the Greens, who are looking for their best ever result tonight, including their first ever lower house seat at a general election, the seat of Melbourne, held until his retirement by Labor star Lindsay Tanner. Now, there was a Green elected to the seat of Cunningham many years ago in a by-election, but that seat was lost again at the election that followed. Now, Heather Ewart is in the heart of this previous Labor stronghold at the Melbourne Town Hall, and we'll just cross to her now. Heather, you've actually, in your coverage of the campaign, you took a very close look at this seat. It sounds as if even Labor is just about writing it off tonight.
Oh, I think it's fair to say that Labor has written this seat off. All of the Labor power brokers that I spoke to last night and again today, and this included senior figures in the party who know this seat very well, have said to me that it is gone. It's gone to the Greens candidate, Adam Bandt, who ran last time and ran it close up against Lindsay Tanner. I think Labor knew that the resignation of Lindsay Tanner was always going to make it tough for them because he had a huge personal following amongst Labor voters in this seat. Kath Botel, the Labor candidate, here now is well known and respected in the Labor movement, but she doesn't have that same crucial following that Lindsay Tanner had. So they're very much giving it to the Greens at this stage. And
one would have thought that the events that happened around the emissions trading scheme and climate change policy with Labor generally was basically a gift in this seat.
It was a huge gift. Look, it's an interesting seat. It was, I suppose, once traditional blue-collar Labor way back in the old days, but it's very much changed. You do still have the high-rise housing commission flats with blue-collar workers and immigrants, but very much there are progressive Labor-type voters in this seat, progressives who are furious about the backflip on climate change, also very unhappy with the way Labor has handled the issue of asylum seekers, and you could see way back, I think, at the start of this year, that they were heading to the Greens in droves.
Okay, now there are a huge number of marginal seats in this election being counted tonight, which is going to put enormous pressure on the Electoral Commission with its counting processes. Now, you've got somebody from the Electoral Commission there. I'll be very interested to hear what they have to say about how it's going to take place.
We do indeed. I'm actually this is the largest polling booth in Victoria, and certainly the largest for the seat of Melbourne. These people are about to start counting votes here in the next few minutes. They'll be working right through till midnight. And I'm joined now by Stephen Kennedy from the Australian Electoral Commission, who's going to take us through how some of the methods are changing this time around.
You're right, the polling places are all closed now. We are at the largest one in Victoria, over 200 AEC staff working here. As you can see, they're starting to do the last cross-checks and balances, and counting will commence now. It's commencing in all polling places on the eastern seaboard. We should start to get some results from small country booths coming through at about 20 to 7. For these larger booths, like the Town Hall and the other big metro ones, particularly in Melbourne, you won't get any tangible results till about 7:30.
Now, there are a lot of marginal seats right around the country. Is that going to make it much harder to be able to decide when this election has been won or lost?
It's hard to predict, Heather. One thing that will help it this year is we've had a change in the legislation. Almost 2 million Australians had voted before today. Now, normally we wouldn't start counting those till next week, but with the change in the legislation, we look to count about 700,000 of those tonight. That will give us a much clearer picture in those marginal seats.
OK, Stephen Kennedy, thank you very much for joining us.
And thanks, Heather. We'll start to see some figures shortly that may begin to make some sense, and it won't take long for the trickle to become a pretty fast-flowing stream of votes right up and down the East Coast, as well as Tasmania, with South Australia and the Northern Territory just half an hour behind. I can't think of an election with dynamics like this one in my lifetime. Counting the marginals on both sides of the pendulum, there are 28 Labor seats on margins below 5% and 21 coalition seats, although nearly all of the action tonight will be on the Labor side. Lee Sales has a more detailed breakdown.
To understand the Coalition's task tonight, we need to go back 3 years to the night before the 2007 federal election. John Howard was the Prime Minister with a 27-seat majority. On election night, a 5.5% swing to Labor spelt the end of the Howard era, and Kevin Rudd moved into the lodge. 28 seats changed hands that night, 26 of those from the Liberal Party to Labor. The ALP ended up with 83 seats, the Liberal Party 55, the National Party 10, and there were also 2 independents. But after each election, the Australian Electoral Commission reviews the electoral map to make sure there's roughly the same number of voters in each seat. If there aren't, the Commission shifts the boundaries. That happened after the last election, and it changes the way we need to look at certain electorates, because 6 seats won by the Coalition in 2007 have become notionally Labor after the redistribution. Swan in Western Australia, Greenway, Macarthur and Gilmore in New South Wales, and Dixon and Herbert in Queensland are all marginally Labor, but the incumbents have been Liberal MPs. What this means is that the Coalition has effectively lost 5 seats since 2007. Here's how the existing chamber looks. Labor holds 88 seats, including those 5 notional gains, the Coalition 59 seats, and the independents round out the numbers with 3. Earlier I mentioned 2 independents. The third, Rob Oakeshott, joined the federal parliament in September 2008 after a by-election in the New South Wales seat of Lyme. With all this in mind, the Coalition tonight needs to win at least 17 seats to claim government, including at least 5 of those 6 notionally Labor electorates. Their seats well worth watching tonight, and we'll certainly be keeping you up to date with what's going on there. I'll be back in about half an hour or so with an early summary of results. Kerry.
Tonight is all about the numbers. The party that wins at least 76 seats will win government. For the Coalition, that means they have to score a net gain of 17 seats, nearly all of which will have to come from Queensland and New South Wales. I'll just give you a quick flavour of the kinds of seats we're talking about, because even if there is a Liberal tide flowing, it may not be irresistible in every Labor seat with a small margin. First to Queensland and the seat of Herbert in Townsville that has a tiny notional margin favouring Labor of 0.3% after the last redistribution. The popular Liberal MP, Peter Lindsay, has retired, and the high-profile Labor candidate is the former Mayor of Townsville, Tony Mooney. The Coalition's Ewan Jones has an interesting night ahead. Flynn, on a margin of 2.2% based in and around Gladstone on the central Queensland coast, was won by Chris Trevor for Labor in 2007. His competition tonight will be Ken O'Dowd. Then there's Longman, stretching from Brisbane's outer north to the tip of the Sunshine Coast on a tight margin also of 1.9%. Dramatically won by Labor's John Sullivan in 2007 when he ousted Liberal Minister Mel Brough. Now, John Sullivan's recontesting the seat, and his challenger is this election's youngest candidate, 20-year-old Wyatt Roy. Then there's Ford on Brisbane's southern flank, extending down the Brisbane-Gold Coast corridor, which Brett Raguse won for Rudd Labor in 2007 and holds with a cushion of 3.4%. Bert Van Manen is contesting Ford for the Coalition. And then there's Dixon on a razor-thin 0.8%, but fascinating to watch tonight. Coalition frontbencher Peter Dutton, the Shadow Health Minister, will struggle to hold this seat, or he may have struggled to hold this seat after the redistribution, facing a fresh challenge from his 2007 opponent, Labor's Fiona McNamara, but the odds may be flowing with him tonight. ABC reporter Kieran McKechnie is at Peter Dutton's electorate office. Now, Kieran, there was a time when Peter Dutton feared for this seat to the extent that he sought pre-selection elsewhere, but the mood seems to be that he's going to be back in the Parliament for another term.
Well, yes, Kerry. I mean, Peter Dutton just won this seat with 217 votes to spare last time. It was incredibly tight. I think it's still going to be tight here. As you mentioned, there was a redistribution in this seat, so it is now notionally Labor. However, speaking to people at LNP headquarters in Brisbane, they're very confident that they're holding on to Dixon tonight. They're sure it's going to stay in Peter Dutton's hands. Now, the big problem for Peter Dutton throughout this campaign has been, of course, this perception that he tried to jump ship. He shopped around for a different seat. He tried to gain pre-selection in a safer seat on the Gold Coast. He failed in that bid, and so he was stuck with Dixon. Now, the Labor Party has not let him forget that. They called him the member for TBA, and during the campaign, his opponent, Fiona McNamara, unveiled T-shirts that all of her campaign workers wore, saying, "Dutton dumped me, now he wants me back."